This podcast is a proud member of the Paranormality Podcast Network.
What a treat and a trick we have for you here today. If this is the first time that you're listening, we are Xander and Stone, the science and supernatural podcast covering everything from exorcisms and possessions to ghosts, hauntings, UFOs, crypto creatures, black-eyed kids, and everything in between. If it's out there and it's weird, we're going to talk about it. So go and raid the Halloween candy stash and kick back because we're going to bring you an episode that you deserve. And if doing a podcast wasn't already delicious enough, I have the pleasure, nay, the honor, of being joined by the lead singer of the heavy metal bluegrass band Stone and the Sticks, and the first woman in history to circumnavigate the globe wearing nothing but Gautier sequins, heels, and a tiara, the unconquerable Stone.
That was beautiful. I am only funny when I'm naked. You worked it in. Well done. And we have with us the circus ringmaster, Xander the Great. And let's add to that this week, Tech Wizard. We have a new website, and Xander did it all by himself.
We do. I can't take all of the credit because the Podpage website actually makes it really, really easy for podcasters to set up a web page for their podcast. So I'm going to actually give a little bit of that credit to Brendan, who runs the Podpage website, and highly recommend, 5-star review. Any podcasters out there who are looking to set up a podcast webpage, that is the place to go. Podpage. It is fantastic.
That's good to know. And what I meant by himself is that I did not help at all. I personally didn't.
Come on. Well, we've got to give you credit. We've got to give you credit for our branding color scheme because that is obviously very important. So we did use and you taught me that colors have numbers. And I didn't know that. So there is, it was a team effort. There's definitely a team effort involved in there. If you
want to live in a world where there are no numbers,
I really do. I really do. But I just want to be like, it's the shade of like that kind of like pigeon blue or, something. What is up with it? Yeah. What is up with the people who name colors anyway? Like who comes up with these names like canary yellow and smoker's teeth and whatever it is those color names are?
Smoker's teeth.
I can't take credit for that joke. That's an Ellen joke. That's an Ellen DeGeneres joke.
That was a good one. Look at you giving all the credit away today.
It's one of those days. I'm feeling very giving. If you've ever felt like you're being watched when you're alone at home or caught a glimpse of something moving in the shadows, a dark that's darker than the dark, then today's episode is for you. We're talking about shadow people. And Stone, I got to admit that I cannot possibly imagine how the hell science is going to explain this one.
It's interesting. There are some science facts. A lot of them are overlapping per episode because we keep coming down to the same. And then what is science? Is it earth science like we had in school? Is it social sciences, psychology? So I have taken the liberty of merging the sciences on not just this episode, but several. So anything that has a word science in it, I'm grabbing for it. So just to be clear, some of the ways that science has explained shadow people is that they are legitimate shadows. They also attribute it to urban mythology, and because it's been gaining traction in the last 20 years, so you can blame it on Hollywood. It may be a figment of the imagination, schizophrenia, or borderline personality disorder. And one we discussed on our first episode, which was sleep paralysis. Sleep paralysis keeps coming back, so I'm really glad we covered that in episode 1.
Yeah, in my research as well, that was one thing that kept coming up as well is the sleep paralysis aspect. So I didn't include it in part of my paranormal research into the shadow people. There were a couple of mentions. But yeah, it does seem to be a very dominant explanation for this idea of shadow people is that it's part of the sleep paralysis phenomenon.
Unless you're wide awake. Alternately, it may be your mind playing tricks on you. According to a new study, when a specific region of the brain called the TPJ is stimulated, it can create the illusion of a shadow person. And given that such experiences are often heightened in psychotic disorders such as schizophrenia and paranoia, and those who believe that they've been abducted by aliens, the results could lead to a better understanding of these neurological conditions. So, of course, neurological conditions always going to make the science list. And so reminiscent of the God helmet and the electromagnetic currents from our episode 7 on ghosts, the findings were published in the September 21st issue of the journal Nature. So there was a young woman, and she wasn't there for seeing shadow people, but while she was there, they were probing her brain to root out where her seizures came from. And then unexpectedly, they did the procedure, and it led to her having the experience of this creepy illusion of a person standing behind her, where nobody was actually present. And the patient described the illusion of a person, and it wasn't like male or female, but it was just a shadow who didn't speak or move. And she said, he is behind me, almost in my body, but I do not feel it. So when the patient sat and embraced her knees with her arms, she noted the man was now also sitting and clasping her in his arms, which she described as unpleasant. When asked to read a card in her right hand, she noted the shadow tried to interfere, saying, he wants to take the card. He doesn't want me to read. And so they don't have, this is the only instance. So they're going to have to do larger studies, but it was specifically from stimulating this part of the brain.
That is, wow. That blows my mind. So it was from this like electrode stimulation of probes actually like physically inside her brain that was causing this shadow person to manifest. And I think the 5G conspiracy theorists are going to go nuts with this one, because we hear a lot of reports, and like you said, it's a lot to do with media really, highlighting the phenomenon of shadow people recently. But we hear a lot of reports of saying that they've had encounters of shadow people, and it can only make you wonder if it's got something to do with like maybe the electromagnetic field or like radio frequencies that are now flying around the earth because of things like cell phones and mobile phones and satellites. If maybe those, those waves, those electronic waves are entering our brains and causing this phenomenon that so many people are seeing shadow people now. That's really interesting.
It's funny you say that. I didn't put it in here because I didn't have any evidence based, but I was thinking 5G. I wonder 5G.
We might have just opened up a whole new realm of conspiracy theory for those people. Something that they hadn't. But you heard it here first. Again. You've heard it here first, folks. 5G causes shadow people.
There go all the towers again. Oddly enough, it could also be caused by sound. And I hadn't heard this or read about this before. The ghost sound frequency or fear frequency is a wavelength that falls into the category of infrasound. Infrasound is a low frequency sound that the human ear cannot hear, but the mind and body can be affected by it.
Wow.
Have you heard of this?
I have heard of infrasound. I know that like it's a lot to do with bass sounds, like it's a lower frequency, but not a higher frequency. I might be mistaken about that. But we've got frequencies that are there's frequencies that are above our human perception. So things like a dog whistle that only dogs can hear, or you get all of those those apps on your phone these days that can actually tell and determine how old you are based on the frequency of sound that you can hear. And then you get these bass frequencies, these lower frequencies. And I remember this is something when I was doing my film degree, and we were looking at how sound is constructed and how you can use things like like backtracks and soundtracks in film to actually invoke an emotion in people. And it's something that's included in a lot of horror movies these days, is that they actually put in resonance sounds that bring up a sensation of fear and terror inside you while you're sitting in the theater. And it's got very little to do with what's on the screen. It's actually got more to do with what's being pumped in through the Dolby surround sound.
When I was in theater as well, we had to watch a horror film with sound, and then the second time we watched it without sound, and it becomes actually comical when you watch a horror film without sound. That's the cheat to watching a horror film, is just not to turn the sound on. Too, I'd read that men, when they get older, they stop hearing the high pitches, and women stop hearing the low pitches. So it seems like you could test this theory just by age and seeing how many.
There's also a very good theory for why women hear higher sounds. Why women hear lower sounds and men stop hearing higher sounds. And it's because biologically you're more tuned to hearing the sound of a baby cry if you're female, that you have to go and attend to the child. Mm-hmm. And it's the same thing, and it's not just in humans. It's in a lot of different animal species as well. That if there's a woman and a man sleeping in a room, if you don't want to wake up the woman in the room, you speak in a very low voice because her ears are not attuned to picking up that sound while she's asleep. Whereas with a man, you make your voice a lot higher.
Interesting. I thought it was because to preserve a relationship, like if you'd been married to the same person for 40 years, you just start tuning
them out.
I can't hear you anymore because it's too much.
Sorry, but you're actually not on my audio wavelength. Yeah, you are not even on my audio wavelength right now. Cannot hear you.
So I feel like it's just trained tuning people out, but your sounds more scientific than mine, so we'll go with it since we're on the science segment. That said, supernatural sciences say it could be. Do you see how I threw in supernatural science? It could be ghosts, astral bodies, time travelers, spirits from other dimensions, a tear in the veil between multiverses, aliens, and my little sister's favorite, demons.
Of course. It's always going to be demons or aliens. That's what they are. And I'm starting to think that the demons are aliens, or maybe that aliens are demons.
It's interchangeable. So that is the science that I dug up for this one. There wasn't much, but I found what I could.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's like I said, when I was researching into the paranormal aspect of this, it is very, when you're doing your research, obviously I'm going to stumble across all the scientific stuff and, curiosity being what it is, I'm going to have a quick read. And there's very, very little scientific explanation that can back this up. And it seems to really come down to more things like psychology, like you said. It could be evidence of something like the evidence of schizophrenia. I was interested to hear the one that I hadn't read or hadn't seen anything to do with the stimulation of that part of the brain that might cause the person to see shadow people. So that was something new that I hadn't looked into before.
Right.
Yeah, very
and
limited.
They did say they would have to, obviously you can't just base it on one person, but sure. They had tested, they had gone into her history. She didn't have any evidence of psychosis or any of those things. So it does seem like it obviously does something. And after we talked about the God helmet, as far as the electromagnetic, giving you that sense of being watched as well. Yeah. So it does seem like, according to science, that stimulating the brain in those ways, not that most of us are walking around with probes in our head, mind you, but
for all we know, we don't know that to be true.
Right. In fact, a strange bump on the back of my neck that I've been suspicious about.
If the majority of the population of the world had a probe in the head, I'd be the one guy who doesn't, because I'm the one guy who'd be like, it's okay, you can put a probe in my head, it's fine.
You always volunteer for.
I'm
trivia.
Always volunteering for these things. Come on, man. We have a favor to ask of our listeners. If you are enjoying listening to the Xander and Stone podcast, do us a solid and share it with everybody. Tell your friends, tell your family, hell, even tell your frenemies about the Xander and Stone podcast. We don't mind if you share our links to our episodes on social media, because after all, sharing is caring. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe or follow button on your podcast app and leave us a comment and a rating. Now, Stone, I know that you have had experiences of shadow people. So if you're okay with telling the listeners about that, would you mind going ahead and sharing some of your shadow people experiences?
Well, now I think it's just 5G, so they were probably testing 5G in
it. You might be, maybe the government's following you around, because the government has got those secret sound wave weapons as well. So maybe you're being targeted by the government.
I think so. They're like, how can we mess with her this week? Let's give her another story to tell.
It's the Scientologists.
Nobody will believe her if she has too many different stories. This is the most logical. I had never thought of that. This is the most logical explanation. If she has too many experiences in too many different genres, then I'm discredited, right? So it's genius on their part.
There we go.
So my son was 8 or 9, I think 9. Not that it matters, but it gives you a timeline. So I was seeing this little mouse run across the house, and I was so convinced about this mouse. And I would move furniture. I was trying to find where this mouse was because I kept seeing it scurrying across. And my boyfriend didn't believe me. So I put out 2 pieces of cheese and waited, because I thought surely it'll take a bite and then I'll have evidence that there's a mouse in this house. And it just sounds like a bad children's book at this point. but after 2 days, I noticed there were like little beads of condensation. I had cheese sweat on my, and he and I agreed that it was probably time to move the cheese. That at this point, either it was a very full mouse or the mouse didn't exist. And so I had been talking to this shaman who was Native American, and I told him about the experience. And he said, when you start seeing shadows, the other side's opening up to you. And often they do it in very small ways. And then as you start to accept it, the shadows get larger. And I kind of dismissed it. I thought it was, it's a nice story, but sure. And so then the next apartment that my son and I moved to, I kept seeing what appeared to be a cat. So I had a mouse and a cat. This is so
not at all a cliche on their part. Shadow people are very cliche, from a mouse to a cat. It sounds like, what's that nursery rhyme? There was an old woman who swallowed a fly, and then she sends in something bigger and something bigger. My God, that nursery rhyme is about shadow people. That's what's happening.
I had no idea.
Yeah, that's what that's about.
That one never made sense to me until now. It's all coming together. If only, the shadow cat was in the same house as the shadow mouse, but they didn't line up. So it was two different locations. And so one day I was talking to my son, and I moved my head. I darted my head real quick. And he said, "Oh, did you see the cat?" And I said, "Yeah, I saw the cat. Did you see the cat?" Like, I was just, so it was so nice to have validation of the shadow, because I hadn't told him. And then we moved in to the next house. And in the next house, I saw people going up and down the stairs. And because it was a fairly new relationship, I didn't want to bring it to his attention. These are always difficult things to bring up. And I don't tell most people until now. Now everyone's going to know. But
this is giving me a flashback also to our sleep paralysis episode, where it was something that you don't bring up on a first date or put on your Tinder profile. Can you imagine what that has sleep paralysis, likes to grunt at night, sees shadow people, swipe left, swipe left.
Yes, right. Has alien experiences, used to live in a haunted house. Sure. Yes. I'm going to be a big hit on all dating sites if I go full vulnerable. So I kept seeing, and I was seeing one specific one who had a hat on. And I know when we discussed that earlier, you said that was a common one. And it's interesting because these things happen to me. And then I guess I just started accepting it. And I really should research it more, because after you said that, I feel like I did at the time, and maybe because there's more stories now, I just hadn't revisited it, because now it's that hat,
the hat
varying
man.
Hats is everywhere. So I don't know how I'd missed that. But anyway, I finally went to Sean and I said, I keep seeing something walking up and down the stairs. And after a few drinks, and I felt more like I could share. And he said, "Me too." And then we both agreed about the hat, and that even to the height, and that he was sort of lanky, and that it wasn't a bad energy. It wasn't something that either of us were concerned about. And we nicknamed him the caretaker, because we said, "Oh, he's just taking care of the family, not a big deal." And so we went about our business. But then later, it was sort of like a portal was opened, and all kinds of different shadow activities started happening at the house. And we felt like it was uncomfortable, like it was not great energy. The other one's not the caretaker. And interestingly enough, one by one, the kids that ranged from ages 8 to 17, they started coming to us about seeing these shadows. And they wouldn't talk to each other about it. So we had to just go along and be like, "Oh, everything's fine. Everything's okay," because we didn't want them freaking out. And at one point we saged the entire house. We went through the inside and outside with the family. And we said, "We're just blessing our new home because we're all living together," and tried to make it about that, not about the shadow people. And so we had a couple of nights where no kids were knocking on our door. But then after that, of course, it came back. And so we moved. And when we moved into the new house, his daughter, who was 8 and didn't really have the words, I guess, to put it into words, but she said, "I really like this new house. There's not so much." And she used her hands to make sort of a really frenzied hand motion. And she said, "It's just," and she put her hands out like calm, like safe on a baseball, like calm. And we knew exactly what she was talking about. The whole energy had shifted there.
And like you said, it sounds to me like that there was a portal there, because often with these sorts of experiences, whether it be ghosts or shadow people, they're either attached to a specific place for whatever reason, whether it be that, that's the location that they died, or like you say, that there's a portal there or some sort of, means of access from there, if they're interdimensional beings, from their dimension to this dimension, or they're attached to a person. And the fact that you moved and they didn't follow, and the daughter actually felt that different energy, suggests that there definitely was something that the shadow people were associated to that location, whether it be, like you say, a portal or a veil or something along those lines. A lot of what
I did actually ask one of the neighbors about in that area. I said, because I started wanting to know the history of the house. Did 7 people die in this house? Like, what is happening here? And she said that there was construction because it was a fairly newly built place. That's why it didn't make sense. And anytime they dig up the earth, that when you unearth something, that it sort of all of a sudden the spirits come. So I haven't heard that before or since, but I thought that kind of made sense, that maybe there was some unearthing. But they liked our stairs, so maybe you're right. Maybe the second floor was where the
portal is.
Multiverse.
You got some sort of like an airport, sort of like like an airport escalator kind of situation from your second floor.
Going up the stairs.
Yeah.
Most of the sightings, even that the kids reported, once in a while it would be in a room, but most of the sightings were on the stairs. And then the other one, which we talked about during the sleep paralysis, and I only had it happen one time, when I was having sleep paralysis, was a shadowy figure. And all I could really make out was the finger pointing at me, like saying you, and it was bum rushing me. And I was trying to pull myself out of the sleep paralysis. So in that specific instance, I was asleep, and I will credit sleep paralysis, but the other ones, all of us had our eyes wide open, and none of the kids were talking to each other. We didn't confirm anything. So the stories shouldn't have continued, but they did. And we saw them too. So.
And was there a specific time? I mean, did you see them mostly at night when it was already dark? Did you see them throughout the day, daylight?
Broad daylight.
Really?
Broad daylight. It wasn't, it wasn't like, oh, well, you had 4 floor lamps and maybe just certain shadows were casting, or I mean, any time of day you could see these shadows. And the only one I could make out that I would have said was a man was the one with the hat that was thin. The rest of them was almost, was more wispy. Okay. But that one was super defined, that specific one. And again, that one I didn't get any sort of, and neither did Sean. I didn't get any. That's why we called him the caretaker. And that was the first one. And we felt comfortable with that one. But then maybe we shouldn't have felt so comfortable, because maybe it was just permission for everyone. Well, everyone else can use our stairs since you're okay with the caretaker being here. Because
he was on he was on some kind of a recon mission and went back and told them, like, okay, this place is fine. They're okay with us being here. Don't worry.
Totally cool.
Just make sure you don't run on the stairs. It's interesting that you say that you saw them during the daytime as well, because the most of the recordings or the encounters with shadow people seem to happen at nighttime. And again, that's where the skeptic part of my brain starts to kick in, that it's just that kind of trick and light and shadow, light and shadow type of thing tricking our mind. And again, it's the nighttime seems to bring out the worst of our fears, right? Like, it's always like, we're scared of places in the dark and we can't really see very well, so we're worried about things lurking in the corner. And I think that it's just a natural instinct that we have for our species to survive, is that if you can't see, there might be a threat there. So, be wary of this place. It brings up kind of our fear and adrenaline in our body, the same as it would for any creature at nighttime that doesn't see so well in the dark. But the fact that you saw them during the daytime kind of adds another layer to that story. And there's a lot of other things that you said that, I mean, if I had a checklist here of all the different, aspects or the different things that people have encountered with shadow people, yours checks off, I would say, a good long part of that list. The fact that it was a man that's wearing a hat and you describe him as lanky or slender is is very commonly reported. The fact that you had spoken to a Native American Indian, it's something that features in the Native American culture and folklore a lot. There's a lot of different aspects here that kind of check off with your story versus what other people have experienced as well. And that's just
paralore, not folklore, paralore.
Yeah, paralore. But that is just the thing, that shadow people and shadow beings are a pretty common feature in folklore and mythology worldwide. And a lot of the paranormal research and scientific research has focused on these kind of ominous beings. And they've entered the public imagination, like you said, and are frequently featured in things like pop culture, across various media platforms, TV shows like The Dead Files and Haunted America and Extreme Hauntings. And Hollywood has made them very famous with loads of movies, and they've even been given immortality in things like novels.
When it happened, though, because it was several years ago, because we were working on screenplays and scripts and stuff, I do remember even looking it up, because I said, why hasn't somebody done a movie about this? So I do think, given that I looked it up at the time, and I don't know how much research I did, but at the time I couldn't find anything. So maybe it does seem like there's been a push now, because when of course, researching for the show, it just feels like the stories are everywhere. But at the time, I was just floored that this hadn't been made into a movie. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but somebody had suggested to us, and I'm not sure, it was an Asian culture story, and I'm not sure which part, but that we could make a little house, like a replica of our own house. And that they do it to trap the spirits, because the spirits don't know, they can't judge size and dimension. And so this little house, and there was a name for it, but I don't know what it is, but this little house replicated that. And so they could live in this little house within your house. Have you heard that before?
I've not read that, but that you're reminding me of just like TV shows like The Haunting of Bly Manor, where the girl's got a little dollhouse, and it's actually the dollhouse that communicates with her about where the ghost is. There's the Stephen King's Rose Red. And there's a miniature version of the house in there as well. There's a lot of horror movies that feature miniature versions of the house, and they've generally like kept in an attic. Even Hereditary, the mother is she builds little like sets and things. I would be very wary of doing that, because those movies don't ever end well when there's a little house involved in the big house. I don't
watch those movies. I'd
be very careful of doing the little house.
I never watch these. Well, rarely do I watch these movies.
I would be very careful of doing the little house thing, because it's in an awful lot of horror movies.
Yeah, I don't recall. I remember there was a very specific name for the type of house, but the idea of it weirded me out, because I thought I wouldn't be able to walk by that little house in my house. I would know it was in there. Yeah. I almost felt a little bit more comfortable with them, freely roaming than being in this little house that I'd have to walk by.
This is where we keep our ghost. Yeah,
right. This is like keeping a mouse in a trap. I don't want to walk by that every day.
But the thing seems to stay the same, is that we don't really know exactly who or what these shadow beings are. And a lot of people have suggested that they're just manifestations of absolute pure evil, so basically demons. And like you said, that they're responsible for things like what we discussed in episode 1, sleep paralysis. And again, like you pointed out, a lot of people say that they might be interdimensional beings that step between our dimension and theirs. But the general idea of shadow people is that they are malevolent, ghost-like presence that is often seen or more felt out the corner of your eye, or seen out the corner of your eye, or more felt like, you feel like you're being watched. And they're, for the most part, described as a moving black figure with a humanoid shape. And that these creatures, they stalk us, they taunt us, they inhabit dark places, they come out at night. And a lot of people describe them, when they see them in the dark, as being darker than the dark. So if you've got shadows in your room, something a lot denser and a lot more black than that shadow. A lot of people describe them as having an elusive physical appearance. And they are those who think that it might be quite deliberate on their part, that they're manifesting either from a spirit realm or from another dimension, and they're imitating our form. Otherwise, they would just be something that we don't recognize, or just a black mass. And this is the form that they have deliberately decided to take when they're on our dimension. And, it also, this idea of them being in black and with a hat, are they associated to the men in black, who are also these unusual, guys wearing, again, just that typical uniform of the hat, and not really having, it's just an interesting, there's an interesting theme with these paranormal beings and entities, that they seem to dress like a 1950s mobster for some reason.
Right? Why is it always 1950s? See? Again, back to be careful what you wear.
Yeah.
you never know if you're going to get stuck in it.
But also, it's all these descriptions, they're very reminiscent of something like the boogeyman. That guy that comes in, or that entity that terrorizes children in the night when the lights go out. It only brings up the question, could it be that children are more psychically open and susceptible to seeing shadow beings? Is that why so many children are so scared of the dark and report this monster under their bed or in their closet? Is it a shadow being? Is it the boogeyman?
Right. Well, and I was reading too that a lot of people report that it's blacker than black, but the red eyes. And I've never seen anything with the red eyes, but his son saw something standing in the corner when the door closed with the black shadow and the red eyes. But I've never seen that.
But it just seems like such a terrifying choice to make. Like, if you're going to come and try and exist on another plane or another dimension, and maybe they're hoping that they would be accepted here, why didn't you take on something that's a little bit more, less striking fear into our hearts? Why didn't you come through as maybe not red eyes, as maybe sparkling blue eyes or something like that?
Right.
Absolutely fucking terrifying for the rest of us. But they also are, and when you start looking at the psychological / parascience explanation for shadow beings, and this is one that also lends to itself to the idea of poltergeist, is that it might actually be something that's manifested out of our own anger, our own fear, our own stress. And a lot of reports seem to happen around times when people have a lot of turmoil in their lives or they're suffering from depression. So there is a theory that it might be like a psychic manifestation of like our inner turmoil and our inner troubles. Yeah, and they've said the same thing about poltergeists as well. And I don't know how old that research is. I'm going to guess it's from around the 60s and the 70s. I think it was the Enfield poltergeist researchers that first suggested it, that it was the teenage girls that were actually causing the poltergeist activity, that they were manifesting this psychic or this telekinetic energy that was causing objects to move around the house. And so there are those who say that that might be what shadow beings are, that when we have depression or we're in, a heightened sense of being like anger or frustration or whatever, that it might manifest these shadow beings as like a physical manifestation of our own psychological issues. But they do
if anyone could do it, teenage girls.
That's what they said. I wasn't going to be the one to say it. Because then I'll get called sexist.
Having taught teenage girls for many years, let me just assure you, if anyone could pull it, it gives the crucible, a little bit more merit than it used to have for the Salem witchcraft trials.
But this idea of shadow beings has existed for thousands and thousands of years. So it's not a new phenomenon in our, modern age where places like, the Travel Channel with all their paranormal TV shows are giving these things a name. The ancient Egyptians, they called the shadow the kaibut, and they said that it was one of the 7 souls that each of us possess. And when we die or when we move on, one of our souls stays behind and becomes a shadow person.
Oh no, that's very interesting. I was just thinking, I wonder if they've been around that long, and if, several years ago I wasn't able to find much research. So what has changed? Is it just that we have all of these TV shows and now people feel more comfortable talking about it, or are the TV shows making people think they see it? I mean, which came first, the chicken or the egg? What do you think?
Well, I think, within this world of fast information that we have, and being able to post things anonymously online, like you can go onto Reddit and post anonymously and nobody knows who you are, maybe people feel a little bit more comfortable sharing their experiences. And you'll hear it's one of the things I mentioned later on, that they think maybe a lot more. And again, it comes back to children. Children get past lives in, reincarnation memories. And they say that children might be able to see these shadow people more openly than what adults are able to. And they suggest that, again, maybe it's because children are less jaded about the world and more psychically in tuned. It might be that at the time, as they get older, they don't want to be thought of as crazy or telling fantasy stories, or you don't want to be labeled as, being out of your mind. So you just plain don't want to believe it for yourself. You don't want to believe that you thought you saw something terrifying. And that's why people maybe didn't talk about it. But yeah, I mean, the idea, it goes very far back. Like I said, it goes to the ancient Egyptians, and they called it kaibut. And it was one of the 7 souls that each person possesses. And even so far back as biblical times, where people would actually curse each other's shadows. So in the book, the book of Numbers, in verse 14:9, they say their shadow is departed from them. And basically what they meant by that was that a person is so detestable, or they will suffer such an undeniable doom and misfortune that even their shadow is like, I'm getting the fuck out of here. You know what I mean? So like they don't want to be around for that. And the Roman or the Latin word for shadow or shade is umbra. It's another word, umbrella, makes a whole lot more sense. But it was also the word used to describe the spirit or a ghost of an individual who went to the afterlife, or the underworld. And that was a place called the Land of Shades. And they went there when they died. And even the ancient Greeks, they would go to the temple of Zeus, Lysias, and they would offer up their own shadow as a sacrifice to Zeus. And Lysias is also the origin story of werewolves. So people back then in like the medieval times and the ancient Greek times, they believed that like a werewolf or a vampire is somebody who lacks a shadow or a reflection. And what they mean by that essentially was that that person lacks a soul. So it was like they had made a pact with the devil. And this was also something that fed into medieval times when they were doing things like witch hunts and accusing people of witchcraft, is that they had said that somebody had sold their soul to the devil, they would no longer have a shadow. So this idea that shadow people and souls and spirits are very, very connected over thousands and thousands of years, going back to the ancient Egyptians and the ancient Greeks and biblical times, is that your shadow is evidence of a soul. And if you didn't have a soul, you wouldn't cast a shadow.
So that gives Peter Pan a whole new level.
Yes, yes.
So he lost his soul. She had to sew it back. They never tell us the full children's story. We're figuring it out, though.
And the more you start exploring those children's stories, the darker and darker and darker they become. In fact, like if you knew the real intention or the original stories behind a lot of the Grimm's Brothers fairy tales, you would never tell those stories to children because they're absolutely fucking terrifying.
Yeah. Well, yes, even if you tell them straightforward, a lot of them are incredibly terrifying. But like, I know, without knowing the backstory, they're pretty harsh.
I know with Red Riding Hood, so the red cape that she wore was basically a symbol from her mother saying that she was a bit of a whore and a bit of a slapper. Because, red is, I mean, you think of things like the Scarlet Letter. Red was not a good color for a woman to be associated with. If she had been pure, she would have been given a white cape. But she was given a red cape, and her mother let her walk through the woods. And the wolf apparently represents just a general predator. So there's a lot of like really, really negative undercurrents to these creepy stories. Yeah, there's a lot of negative undercurrents. But all this like superstition and the fear that like, you know, spread over the ages with the ancient like Greeks and the ancient Egyptians, and especially during medieval times, it made people very aware of shadows and what their shadows were doing. So it was considered bad luck for your shadow to fall over a grave. It was considered bad luck for your shadow to fall over a fast-moving river because they were worried that it would carry your soul away. It was bad luck for your shade to be cast over the edge of a cliff. So this, and again, it just all comes down to the, you know, risking your soul. So this idea of shadows and shadow beings has always been very closely linked to the idea of spirits and souls. So again, it's not just something that our modern media has highlighted and said like, oh, these are ghosts, these are spirits, these are interdimensional beings. This is folklore that goes back thousands and thousands of years. And when I started to look at different cultures and sort of hone in more closely about their folklore and their mythology and their beliefs around shadow beings, it becomes very clear as well that these entities are a common phenomenon just worldwide. And what's also very striking is that they have a lot of features and a lot of themes that seem to go from one culture to another. And it'll be, you know, there'll be a common thread between the mythology and the folklore behind shadow beings on completely different opposite sides of the globes, where those cultures maybe never would have interacted with each other, unless, of course, the ancient aliens came down and told them all about it. But that's another episode for another time.
Dropping shadows from their UFOs.
But it's weird. So, like, how can so many cultures and so many different people from all over the globe be reporting something that is so similar? It's no coincidence. There's got to be some substance to that. And is that itself evidence that shadow beings are real? The fact that all these different cultures have mythology and folklore and superstitions around them, and that it's not just a product of our imagination or a product of a belief system, but it's actually a real separate entity to our own living souls.
It's certainly making me feel much better about myself.
Good.
It's so like misery loves company, sort of crazy loves company. if you have more people validating it, so that's helpful.
And maybe that's one of the things that modern media and information is allowing these things to become a normal part of conversation. Whereas in like older times, you know, this sort of a conversation would be poo-pooed, and you know, like the scientific community wouldn't dream of touching that. And you know, even further back, if you weren't talking about something that fits in with the Christian or the Catholic dogma, like you were absolutely unheard of to talk about.
Demons.
Yeah, demons. There we go, demons. But it's something where there's a lot more exposure to a lot more people, and a lot more people are feeling more comfortable about talking about these things. And you really only have to go into somewhere like Reddit or go and look online and have a goo, and just go and type in shadow people, and there are thousands and thousands of websites and Reddit threads and all sorts. In fact, I took one of them, and one of the cultures that I looked at is Japan, and what Japan says about shadow people or shadow beings. And please bear in mind as well that when you go onto like a wiki page for Japanese mythology and gods and spirits and demons, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, and they've all got names and they've all got very specific roles. But one of the Reddit stories that I found online was by a user called Kaicha, and they said that they were woken up by a shadow being in Japan. So I'm just going to read what their post said. So one of my friends is from Japan, and I was spending New Year with her and her family in the Tohoku area, which is in the northern part of Japan. The first time I stayed the night there, I was abruptly woken up by somebody shaking me. It didn't hurt, but right when I woke up, I saw a black figure over me grabbing both sides of my arms. At first, I thought it was my friend who was sleeping right next to me, but she was there lying fast asleep. I continued to look at this black figure kneeling right above me, and then it suddenly put its completely black, featureless face up against mine. It then started moving slightly from side to side, like it was trying to figure out who I was. It then released me and faded away. I just lay there and pinched myself. I was awake. I wasn't dreaming. I don't know what I saw, but I didn't feel scared. The next day, I was telling my friend what happened, and my friend's mom overheard me. My friend's mom then walked up to me, crying, saying that her son had died before he was born. She said that she sees him too, and that she's watched her son, or the shadow being, grow bigger and bigger as the years went on. What a weird experience, but not a bad one. Isn't that interesting?
It is interesting. The other thing, though, about the mom, if, what the shaman had said, that she would see smaller than larger, it kind of goes along with that thing, but more and more accepting.
And, of course, you're going to be accepting if you think it's the spirit of your past over child or your past over baby. But, again, it's one of those things, and you always read about it when people talk about like doing Ouija boards and you get contacted by like a childlike spirit, or if you're doing a paranormal investigation and you hear it like a disembodied child's laugh. They warn you against those because they say that that's exactly what the demons want you to think. They want you to think it's a safe, you think of a kid, you think children's spirits aren't going to do anything. They just want to play with us. But what they're actually doing is they're trying to trick you into engaging with them because it's actually something of far more evil than the spirit of a child. That's so creepy. But the Japanese, like I said, they have a lot of folklore around these shadow beings. And in Japanese folklore, the yokai are the class of supernatural monsters or apparitions that are said to be shadow beings. And the translation of the kanji, or the translation of the Japanese characters, means bewitching, attractive, calamity. And because it's two characters, the second one means specter, an apparition, mystery, or suspicious. And the characteristics of yokai are pretty diverse, actually. So they can range from being malevolent and mischievous and causing misfortune and harm, all the way to the absolute opposite end of the spectrum, where they bring good fortune to the person who encounters them. But along with manifesting in this humanoid shape, the yokai are said to be able to shapeshift into animals, inanimate objects, or just be a shapeless mass with no real discernible shape. And again, this comes back to the story that you've told. Shadow people are said to be able to shapeshift. So they come in the form of like a mouse or a cat or a fox or something like that. But in Japanese culture, they can take on anything in the natural environment. So they can look like a person, they can look like a tree, they could look like a whole host of animals, but they seem to prefer things like being a fox or a turtle. And then they say that they can even manifest as something as concrete as a building or a piece of furniture. Diverse shape-shifting talents there. And they could become...
There's your haunted bunk beds.
There we go. And they could come in. That could come in super useful. Like if you're one dinner chair short for your guest, you could be like, we need a shadow person who can manifest into just a matching set of garden furniture, please.
Right? It's so much cheaper.
These yokai, they've been reported in Japan and even in ancient China as far back as the 1st century. So they're definitely not a new concept to Asian cultures. And there is a book from the 1st century in what is now China, and it's titled Shun Shi Zhuan, with the statement in this book that the specter, or the yokai, was in the imperial court for a long time, and the king asked Tui, which is one of his subjects, for a reason, or one of his advisors. He asked him for a reason, and the advisor's answer was that there was great anxiety in the court, and he recommended that they should just empty the entire imperial room so that the shadow being would leave. And again, that ties into these shadow beings being psychic manifestations, because he said, like, in the court, whatever it was that they were discussing that day inside the imperial court had brought along a lot of anxiety from all of the subjects and the advisors and the king himself. And that psychic energy, that anxiety, was manifesting the shadow being to be in the room. So again, it just ties in nicely with that. And then if you go completely to the opposite side of the world and to the United States of America, and particularly look at a Native American tribe called the Choctaw. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's Choctaw. So I'm going to say it as Choctaw.
I'm with you.
The Choctaw, the Native American tribe from the southeastern United States. They also have a lot of stories and folklore surrounding shadow beings. And there's one in particular called Nalusa Chito. And it's got another name called Impa Shalup. And this is a very big, tremendous black being, but it was said to be the soul eater. And if a Choctaw person allowed evil thoughts or depression to enter their mind, this Impashalup would creep inside them and devour their soul.
I actually just saw an episode of The Magicians, which I've binged like mad, but that must be where they got that, because there's an entire episode about that, about being the soul eater, and that you couldn't be angry or depressed and targeting females, though, in this one. But yeah.
Again, it's not something that's only specific to the Native American culture as well. There are a lot of African cultures that talk about this soul eater creature as well, and that it manifests as a dark shadow, and that it gets inside you if you have depression or anxiety, or if you carry around a lot of anger, or if you bear a grudge. Basically, any negative emotions that you carry around with you entices this thing to come and eat your soul. And many of the Choctaw Nation, actually, they believe so much in this that they will not even say the name Impashalup for fear of summoning the spirit. So, that's something that goes back to like...
You just did it very fearlessly. You are really begging for these things to come to
on
you.
The door. But it goes back to like...
If they're not going to say it, I'm not going to say it. Not you.
I should just bleep out all of those parts in the episode. Well, if the beep comes along, get beep. But, again, it's they won't say his name for fear of summoning him. And that's something that ties in like with all the Harry Potter movies and Voldemort, he who shall not be named.
Or Candyman.
Or the Candyman, yeah. Or Bloody Mary, if you're looking in the mirror and you can't say that 3 times. But the Choctaw people, they believe that inside every human we have 2 souls. We have this one called a Shilup, which is our inside shadow, or our ghost, or our spirit. And we have another one called the Shilombish, which is our outside shadow. And the Shilup, the inside shadow, is said to move on to the realm of the spirit after we die, and it'll live there for all eternity. But the Shilombish, or our outside shadow, that remains here on earth, and it will wander around restlessly moaning, and it'll haunt and target its friends and family because it wants them to move on from the place where it died. So it's basically forsaking this place, and it wants them to go away and find somewhere new to live. So, that's an interesting concept right there.
That is an interesting concept.
But again, similar to the one in Japan, like the yokai, this Shilombish, it can shapeshift into different animal forms. And here's a common animal that it shares with the Japanese one, is that it shapeshifts into a fox or into an owl. Now, again, a lot of interesting tie-overs from different cultures. The Chinese demons are said to be able to shapeshift into animals, and the most popular one is the shape of a fox. The Native American Shilombish can shapeshift into the shape of a fox. The Japanese one shapeshifts into the shape of a fox. So watch out for foxes. Could be a shadow person. But what this Shilombish of the Native American culture does is that it will bark like a fox, and then at night it will screech like an owl. And the idea is that it's supposed to cause confusion and fear in the living. But the Shilombish, if you hear the bark of the fox or the screech of an owl, it's considered to be a very bad omen. And the Choctaw tribe, they have a way to differentiate between whether or not you're hearing a Shilombish or whether or not you're hearing one of the actual animals. And they say that when a fox barks or when an owl screeches, another fox will bark or another owl will reply to that animal's cry. But when a Shilombish does it, no animal will respond. So if you hear an owl screeching at night and there isn't a screech following up, probably a shadow person, probably a demon.
Probably. It's really exciting, though, that now we know how to answer the question, what does the fox say? Apparently, there are people that know. So that's good. That's good information.
And then another
could have
thing,
saved us all from that song.
another thing about these Shilombish as well is that they seem to target children. So it's one of those things that, we all regret getting older. But if I'm over 35 and I'm not going to be stalked by a shadow being, that's fine by me.
No kidding.
So
it's interesting in a lot of these stories that we've covered throughout our podcast so far, that if you're sad or depressed or a child, they're always targeting sort of the more vulnerable.
Yes.
And not going for like you would think that there would be one of these creatures that would just come for the strongest, like go ahead and take him down. But it's always vulnerable.
Trump. Sorry, what?
I am in America's interest.
But like you said, it's interesting. They go for people who are weak and vulnerable, and children obviously we consider to be weak and vulnerable, but children also instinctually react to emotion. Right. when a kid is not happy, they're screaming and it's very apparent that they're not happy. So they're very emotive beings. And somebody who's got depression or anxiety or fear is also really tapped into their emotions and, maybe that's what's drawing in these shadow people. But there is, a more recent report of this shadow person. And this one is really going to sort of drive the point home about depression and mental illness. And this one is called Walking Sam, and he's from South Dakota in Pine Ridge. I don't know if you know where that is. And this particular Native American community that lives in Pine Ridge in South Dakota on a reservation, they've got a lot of issues that, modern indigenous people tend to face. But regrettably, one of the biggest issues they have is group suicide of their young adults and children. And that is not something you often hear about. And these suicides in South Dakota have been attributed to a malicious shadow being called Walking Sam. And while his name sounds pretty harmless, pretty much anything but harmless, and Walking Sam is believed to be a very ancient shadow being associated with Native American folklore, and from a set of shadow beings that they call the stick Indians. I almost said stick insects, the stick Indians. And a lot of children, even today, they hear legends, like we hear about the boogeyman and be good or the boogeyman's going to come and get you or whatever it might be. The children of this Native American tribe, they hear legends of this sinister entities. And it's said that these demonic presences still stalk the reservation and try to lure unsuspecting victims to doom, even if they're in their childhood. And you'll know that you've heard one of these stick Indians because they whistle to you. So this Walking Sam guy whistles. Can you get any more fucking creepy? Red eyes, black shadow figure, wearing 1950s fedora and whistling. Come on, guys.
That's whistling.
Anybody who says that they're not here for malicious purposes is just plain fucking wrong, because that's pretty much all pretty creepy stuff. But they say that if you follow the whistling, that you become hypnotized and you sort of become paralyzed, or not so much paralyzed as lose control of your own body, and that you start to lose your mind a bit and go insane. And they also say that if you disrespect them, that these entities hold a grudge against you and they will seek you out and enact their vengeance upon you no matter what the cost. And again, some of the tribes, they fear these beings so much that they won't even speak of them. So the result of that is that the full legend of this Walking Sam and these stick Indians is not completely understood outside of the indigenous community. They're okay to talk about it amongst themselves as part of their folklore and traditional stories, but they don't really let the information out. So we don't know terribly much. But Walking Sam, one of these stick Indians, he is said to be one of the most powerful ones. It's more to do with how he goes about getting his victims and who his victims are. So what he does is he seeks out victims, again, who are vulnerable, so young adults and children, and he starts to tell them, or he starts to give them thoughts that they are not worthy of living. And they start to feel a sense of death. They start to hear voices in their head. And basically they get this kind of internal thought that you don't deserve to be alive. And he continues to do this and continues to do this until he manages to convince them to commit suicide. And it does seem that his favorite victims are young adults and children. And again, it might be because they're particularly susceptible to these kinds of suggestions. The description of him is that he's said to be tall and wear a black hat and have a very thin body. So he sounds an awful lot like your, what did you call him?
Who we referred to as the caretaker.
The caretaker, yeah, the caretaker. There are a lot of reports of this guy called the Hat Man, or he even kind of fits the description of that creature called Slenderman, or Slender Man, but I've been told it's Slenderman. And he's been particularly active, this Walking Sam. He's been particularly active in the last decade, according to this Native American community. And then the last 5 to 10 years, there's been a significant increase in suicide attempts on this reservation. Luckily, or I don't know if that's luckily, but only 9 of the suicide attempts were successful. I'm not so sure if I should say luckily for that, but only 9 of all of these suicide attempts were successful. All of the victims were young, and even as young as something like 12 years old. And none of the victims of this group suicide were over 24. So it's a very specific demographic, and it's a very young demographic.
And the survivors, they say they also attribute it to this Walking Sam.
They don't maybe specifically say that they've seen the shadow figure, but they've had all the reports of having these thoughts of feeling a sense of dread and evil and death around them, of having these thoughts that I don't deserve to be alive, I shouldn't be alive, I should kill myself. So they say that this is how Walking Sam targets and torments his victims. But I didn't see anything that specifically had a kid saying, I saw the Shadow Man, I saw Walking Sam.
I was just wondering if it was coming from them or if it was from the elders who had the sense that they were being targeted.
It seems to come from the elders. It does seem to come from the elders. And in December of 2015, 103 suicide attempts were reported on this reservation by people between the age of 12 and 24 years old. And they do think that the number actually could be significantly higher. And there was a local who lived on the reservation that claimed there had been over 200 suicide attempts in only 3 months. And if you keep in mind that this is a population of 40,000 people who live on the reservation, statistically, that is a significant percentage of that community.
It is.
And of course, those sorts of issues and those sorts of losses or suicide attempts within the youth would really weigh very heavily on the hearts and minds of the elders and the people in the tribe. And they say that the suicide attempts have persisted in the years since then. And the concerning thing is that they're not individual acts. These are group attempts of suicide. And a lot of them, they said, started with very disturbing online posts. And the parents and the elders say that it's very out of character for their child, that they went from being a happy individual, a normal child, and just did a complete 180 and now has these very dark thoughts and, posting things online about suicide and how to go about suicide. And the elders and the parents of the tribe, they found Facebook groups where the youth on the reservations had been sharing all these different suicide techniques and talking about killing themselves together. And almost like it was some sort of like an after-school activity, like there was the suicide club or something like that. And even so far as that there were children posting videos about how to tie a noose, encouraging self-harm amongst their peers, and even just simple messages like the words, go do it. But, it also means that even if the youth in the community didn't actually try to commit suicide, that they've still been exposed to the idea of it, or they might even be having suicidal thoughts, or they've been exposed to methods and techniques of suicide. So no matter which way you look at this, it's very, very concerning.
I know it's going to sound insensitive, but I just wouldn't think you would need a lot of different techniques to kill yourself. Like that you're sharing these different techniques. Like that's bizarre to me.
I've had friends in the past who have said that they've committed, or not they've committed suicide, that they've considered committing suicide. And from the conversations that I've had with them, a lot of people are worried about things like pain. They don't want it to hurt. They want it to be just something,
to
be over. So things like, whether it's like cutting your wrists or shooting yourself or whatever it might be, that they don't want any pain involved. And I can only imagine that these different techniques that they're exploring, if a kid is posting, okay, go and hang yourself, and another kid is thinking, okay, well, that sounds like it's going to hurt, they might go and research a way that isn't going to hurt, like take a handful of sleeping pills or, do the, but either way, exposing anyone at an influential age between, ages of 12 and 18 or 24 or whatever it might be, it's putting those ideas inside their head, inside a mind that otherwise might never have thought about it. And
of course.
And yeah, I mean, what teenagers are like, it's one of those things that your mother always says to you. Like, if all your friends go and jump off the bridge, are you going to jump off the bridge? Well, if all your friends on the reservation are committing suicide, are you going to commit suicide? Like, it's that like kind of, where group mentality starts to take over. And they're at an age where their judgment can be very easily influenced and clouded. There were even images on shared on social media on Facebook of nooses hanging in a tree. Nooses, multiple, plural, lots of nooses hanging in a tree in a very small community on the reservation that only had about 1,000 people. And the tribal police later said that they believed that all those nooses were left there as an encouraging invitation to individuals to go and hang themselves. So, an urban legend like this is often quickly brushed off as childish or fantastical, but not when it's part of your community, not when it's happening in your community. And the elders and the adults in this community, they were very willing to discuss this idea of Walking Sam. They believe that there is an entity responsible for this happening in the community and responsible for the high suicide rate. And they even went so far as to discuss the presence of Walking Sam at their tribal meetings and their community meetings. And they pretty much recognized and noted that people were being influenced by this shadow being, and they started to warn the community not to walk in the streets alone at night, to stay away from dark and shadowy places, And there was even one woman who contacted government officials and asked the government to intervene and help to deal with this Walking Sam character and to get extra police patrols around the reservation so that they could look out for him. So whether he's real or not, many of the adults within
something's
tribe,
happening.
Something's going on. And many adults within the tribe were treating Walking Sam as a genuine and severe issue that needed to be addressed. And, again, it comes back to this idea that it could be a personification of our own psychological things. So, are the elders of the village not really helping out because they're not necessarily getting these kids the mental health and therapy and, things like that they need, the medication that they need?
Either way, it has to be addressed. It doesn't really matter. It just, obviously something's happening and it must be addressed.
Yeah. But again, it checks a lot of the boxes of what people have been reporting as shadow beings. He's wearing a hat, he's tall and he's slender. And if they're seeing this type of a being outside of this kind of reservation community or this Native American community, people like yourself are seeing it. Again, does that kind of validate that Walking Sam might actually be a real entity who is enticing young children to go and commit suicide? It's if somebody like yourself is seeing and reporting something that matches that description. And this Hat Man, he is one of the most famous and documented shadow beings out there. And he was actually first introduced in 2001. I don't know if you came across this idea this information when you were doing your research. But the subject of shadow people was really highlighted in the media in 2001. And it was introduced via the mainstream media, introduced to the mainstream media via Coast to Coast AM, which is a very famous radio show and podcast that focuses on things like the paranormal and UFOs. And after this particular broadcast, loads and loads of people started sending in drawings and renderings and sketches of the shadow beings that they had seen and shared stories about their own encounters with shadow people. No one really expected such a prolific number of people to have had these encounters and sightings. It was an author by the name of Heidi Hollis, and she wrote a book about shadow people in 2008, and she was the first person to essentially coin this phrase, the Hat Man. So the idea of the Hat Man might have been around for a long time, but he only really got his name in 2008, and the shadow people only really came to mainstream media's attention in 2001. But the similarity of people's stories has given the creepy character a lot of popularity and a lot of, basically a lot of credibility, I would say. And stories of the people who have shared their encounter with the Hat Man, like I said, they're just absolutely all over the internet. There's even a website specifically dedicated to the Hat Man and people's stories and tales of the Hat Man. He can pretty much appear at any time of day. So not a huge surprise that you've seen him on your stairs. And he can pretty much appear in any location. But most people seem to report him in bedrooms and in basements. So, two creepy places. One is the basement. Nobody likes the basement. The basement's a scary place.
Nobody likes the basement.
Not a huge surprise that a lot of people report seeing a shadow creature down there. And then a lot of, like you said, a lot of people encounter the Hat Man usually while they're either falling asleep or they've just woken up or they're already sleeping. So again, it kind of makes sense that he would be in people's bedrooms as well. But, again, the common threads are that people report feeling a very dark energy coming from him. They know that he's evil, or they get a sense that he's evil and that he wants to do something to them. He wants to harm them. A lot of people said that they get the feeling that he is feeding off their fear and he's actually enjoying their fear. And it's kind of, he's taking their energy. So a bit like he's something like an energy vampire. I mean, you said that you kind of had a bit of a positive experience with him.
We had very fond feelings for him. Actually, maybe he was the twin brother, keeping everything in balance, and we got the good version.
Maybe
because I did not the other ones that started coming were in nondescript male or female. I just assumed they're all men, but that's me. But there was no way to really. This one specifically male. We didn't get that sense with this specific one. So I'm going to bet it was the twin brother that was doing good, not harm.
But you also said that you didn't get a bad vibe and you were kind of welcoming of him. And maybe that's it. Again, maybe it's a manifestation of the energy.
He was a trickster.
Maybe. Or maybe it's a manifestation of the energy that we're giving off. If you're giving off a positive vibe, maybe he's a positive vibe. If you're crapping yourself at him, maybe he is, feeding off that fear.
So he's like a mirror energy. And again, except that wouldn't explain the other ones that definitely had a dark. Well, maybe things do get a little darker then. Maybe you're onto something.
Yeah.
So maybe it's a mirror energy.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
And what you said there just now as well is that you said it's always a hat man, or it's always, we always assume the shadow beings to be male. And that is something that's featured in research as well, is that there have been very few, if any, reports of shadow beings coming in a female form. And there was one that I did read, I remember reading, and I might get the facts all wrong now, but there was one Reddit user who posted a story about seeing the hat man, the male energy, but had what they felt was a young girl or a young female shadow person with them in the form of a child. So like a small female kind of an energy. And, again, it's lulling you into that false sense of security. Like, here's me, the big ominous, but don't worry, I've got this cute little girl one with me, so everything's going to be okay. But there aren't that many reports of like a female energy coming off these shadow people, or that they appear in like a female form. But when it's a moving black...
I thought I was just being sexist. So
no,
that's good to
it's
hear.
fine. It's fine. Your sexism...
I don't know. They were all men. I'm pretty
it's
sure
completely
they were all
warranted. But, it does make you think that people who witness the Hat Man, they already are in a state of like semi-fear or anger or anxiety. When you're going down into the basement and it's a dark and scary place, you're already got your guard up. So you're hyper aware, looking for anything that's moving. So, it just might be this negative feeling that's either manifesting a Hat Man, or that's causing your imagination to go haywire and thinking that you're seeing one. Again, this brings me back to another thing that I read on Reddit, because, the gospel according to Reddit, if it's on Reddit, it must be true. And it was a user, their name was Strangely Dazed. And they really highlighted the fact that the shadow people appeared during a time of great anxiety in their life. And their story goes, my now ex-boyfriend always talked about these shadow people. He saw the top hat man, or the hat man, or the man in the fedora. So he's been described as wearing many different hats.
I was going to say, mine didn't have a top hat. Definitely a fedora.
Makes you think he's like some sort of like a Broadway show shadow man.
1950s. Mr. Peanut.
But he said that her boyfriend said that the Hat Man always came to warn him of awful things that were about to happen. So she, of course, thought that the boyfriend was a complete psycho and just dismissed it. But then 2 months later, she started to see the Hat Man next to their bed, and he would lean over her. Basically, long story short, is that this girl's boyfriend ended up violently assaulting not just her, but several other girls as well. And she says that she read somewhere that this hat person might show up if you're in the presence of evil, or if you're in the presence of an evil person, or in a dangerous environment, an environment that has bad energy. And she said that she also saw...
That checkbox is mine.
It does,
so
right? Like it does.
It does. Check.
You felt that the space that you were living in had a bad energy. Again, check. Hat man, check.
Yeah.
And she said that she saw a different type of shadow man, or a different form of a shadow being, in the middle of the road in the car at night with her boyfriend. And she explained the appearance of this hat man, or this shadow being, to her boyfriend. And he immediately explained that this shadow being only appears when death occurred. And ironically, it was the next day when she went to the doctor's office that she was informed that she had just miscarried her child the night before. So anytime she saw these shadow people, it was always either around a time when, the boyfriend was being a dick and assaulting people and being violent, or, around death or something like that. So, again, there seems to be a very strong link to our psychology and our psychic energy to shadow people. It just always seems to circle back to that people find that they see these beings when they're around bad energy, or they have bad energy in themselves.
Right.
You just don't seem to be able to get away from that.
That does make sense.
And there's also always the sense people say that they feel like they're being watched. And they say that the feeling is no different when the Hat Man, or when you're in the presence of the Hat Man. And he said that he can appear, like I said, he can appear in different situations. He can appear to multiple people at the same time. So the same thing as your experience. He's not just appearing to one person who might then be called crazy, but he's actually appearing to lots and lots of different people, which kind of also validates it, right?
It does.
Many witnesses claim you are validated. Many witnesses claim that they met the Hat Man when they were children, and they just kept the stories to themselves for fear of being teased, or for fear of being thought of as crazy. But a lot of them just simply didn't want to believe it was true as well. So, there are many theories around why these shadow people are here and why we see them. Like you said, it might be an interdimensional being. He might only be partially visible because he's on a different vibration to what we are on this realm, and he can only manifest it, to a certain amount. There is also a psychic medium called Natalia Kuna, and this is a quote by her. She says, "Shadow people are conscious, intelligent, interdimensional beings that can shapeshift into various forms and figurations and move back and forth between dimensions." So if anybody's going to know about these things, it's going to be a psychic medium, right?
Of course.
There are also people who say that maybe he's an astral projection, or the shadow people are astral projections of people who are alive now, and that they're just astral traveling and we happen to catch a glimpse of them.
Right.
So apparently we're all astral traveling in top hats these days, which I find that fabulous. If I can't wear a top hat during my regular waking hours, at least I can do it when I'm astral traveling. But like you said as well, that the other theories are that the Hat Man is a time traveler or a ghost, and of course the most logical explanation, an alien. Yes. There are also, what did you call your shadow person? The guy with the hat again? What did you call him?
Caretaker.
The caretaker. There are people who also suggest that they might be watchers or guardians. And when you said the caretaker, I was like, wow, that's like really in line with the idea of them being watchers and guardians.
And what's crazy is I told you that I researched at the time. It was probably a cursory Google search at the time. And after we moved, I really didn't give it much thought. And then when we were talking about it a couple episodes again, and you immediately recognized the hat person, I had no idea this was a thing. I just knew what our experience was. So I started researching. I was like, it feels like it's everywhere. Like, I don't know how I've missed it. It's not like something I obviously researched since then, but it's exciting to sort of feel validated by it on some level. Yeah. Although again, we didn't have that sense of any sort of evil with that specific one, but then things shifted with the others.
And if it's something like, let's say, like mass hallucination, global mass hallucination, where people are all hallucinating or imagining the same being, why are they all imagining him in very specific clothing, in a hat,
in a fedora?
If it's like, if we said like with the 5G conspiracy, or like audio or wavelengths, magnetic, pulse wavelengths or whatever. Again, why would that manifest as a hat? Why would he be wearing a hat? Why are all the physical descriptions?
What does he need a hat for?
What's this hat about? I'm telling you, the answer is in the hat. If we can figure out why he's wearing the hat.
Why the hat?
And just any being traveling interdimensional, why bring a top hat? Why did you specifically choose that costume?
I think the hat for me, that's probably part of the sense of calm, because it just felt like an older man presence, and like what your grandfather would wear. Like the one when I was having my sleep paralysis that bum rushed me, there was no hat. Okay. I feel like if he looked like the caretaker, I probably would have been a little more calm. Yeah. He's much more creepy without the hat. So maybe that's the point of the hat, is to lure you into a sense of, oh, it's just my grandpa, or it's just an old man he's traveling through. Not a big deal.
But this idea of them being watchers or guardians or caretakers, again, it just opens up so many more questions. And as with anything in the paranormal, when you go looking for answers, all you end up with is more questions. So if there are watchers, if there are guardians, what are they watching? Why are they here? What are they looking out for? Is there a reason why some people see them and other people don't see them? Do those people have more of a connection to the psychic realm, the spirit realm, than other people do? There's just are we just dealing with beings that have some sort of a voyeur fetish and they just want to come and watch us?
Like, they're just checking out. We were probably a good TV show for them, if that's what it is. Very entertaining.
But when all these stories started coming out as well, it does seem that a lot of people had knowledge or encounters with the shadow beings and the Hat Man without ever having heard of the shadow being or the Hat Man before that. So they had no existing or prior knowledge. They'd never seen anything on TV before.
Like me.
Like yourself. And they all report the same common characteristics. And it was really only once they started looking for answers that they started, hearing these stories from other people. But of course, like you said, there is no method to test any of these ideas. So we either just have to believe that the Hat Man exists as a separate entity to us, or that it's just a psychological phenomenon or a psychic manifestation. So I'm going to ask you, what do you think? If you were to say what a shadow person is, what do you believe them to be?
Because I had two different experiences, one where I felt like it was a very benevolent spirit or whatever it was versus the other one. If it was just the caretaker, I would have bought into the whole there's a rip in the veil and the another universe is bleeding through. I would have bought into that. But the other, whatever carried the really dark, crazy energy, unless it's aligned in the other universe with New York City and there's just a lot of angry people at lunchtime, that's possible. But otherwise, I know that I don't know. I know what I felt. I know what the kids felt. I know what we saw, but I know that I don't know.
Yeah.
It would be interesting to find out.
It's the same when I think about it. It's, again, I want to believe that there are these entities visiting from other dimensions. But again, just for lack of evidence, okay, there is, I always talk about not having terribly many paranormal experiences. And because I always tend to brush them off or explain them away. And in this apartment that I'm living in at the moment in China, I was in the bathroom and I think I was shaving or brushing my teeth or just doing some mundane thing. And for a brief second, looking at my reflection, but just out of the corner of my eye, but in the reflection, but bear in mind, it was the reflection that I was looking at.
You're already explaining it away.
I thought that I saw like head and shoulders of a shadow being in a humanoid shape pop up behind me and then pop down behind my shoulder again. So almost like somebody peeking up over your shoulder and then ducking down again. But, again, it was in a reflection. So now we're saying that these shadow beings actually cast a reflection in a mirror, in a surface. And when you're brushing your teeth or doing a shaving or whatever, you're kind of looking dead on into your own face. So you're not focused on your periphery so much. So it was like a movement. And it couldn't have been the dog. It couldn't have been the cat because they're way above.
They're not tall enough.
They're way behind. Yeah, way below my shoulder level. But some movement popped up and popped down. And I can tell you that much is that I'm sure that there was movement behind me. It popped up and popped down. Again, it's not something that freaks me out terribly much. And even so much as I would talk to it, if I get that creepy feeling when I'm in my apartment by myself and I feel like I'm being watched or I feel like I'm not alone, I will vocally say like either you're not welcome here, please leave, or I'll say like I'm going to bed now. You're not allowed to follow me into the room, or just something along those lines. And that feeling immediately goes away. It immediately dissipates. And I wonder, is that a spirit entity going, oh, okay, cool. Well, we'll see you tomorrow then. And, have a good night.
Check you later.
Yeah. Or like, so sorry. Didn't mean to disturb. We'll leave you. Or is it just me kind of psychologically reassuring myself, that if
it works, it doesn't really matter.
It doesn't really matter. Maybe that's why I'm not having paranormal encounters, because I keep telling them all to fuck off. Please just leave.
It does sound suspicious. They're like, he's not taking it. And for us, we're like, oh, it's the caretaker. Please have our stairs. You can use whatever you like here. So, yeah, it was an open invitation. We didn't mean to everyone, but he probably got the word out. I think you're right on that one.
So with this like knowledge that we have now of shadow people and shadow beings, if you saw another one, what would you do? If you saw the half man again.
I will tell you, we've talked about it enough today that it's I don't know, it's 1,000,000,000 o'clock. It's 12:12 here.
Yep.
And partway through when you were talking, I thought I am going to have a really hard time sleeping tonight. And this is the first episode that even after the haunting one, where I felt like, this might be a little bit more difficult tonight. So, I'm very big on energy. And so if it's a negative energy, then when I felt those negative presences before, like at the other house, I probably should have done what you did, but I would, sometimes I would light incense, light a candle, do a meditation, but most often I would turn on TV, turn on music, something to sort of, just sort of numb me out so that I wasn't paying attention to it. So likely that's what I would do, but.
And I think, like something like vocally saying like, you're not welcome here, and then feeling a sense like, okay, well, now it's gone. That feeling has gone away. And again, I don't know if it's just me reassuring myself and saying, okay, you've done what you can do, or if it's actually a presence leaving. But all of these reportings and encounters of shadow beings, no one's ever been physically harmed by one that I have read of. Anybody is welcome to call in or email us and tell us that they were physically attacked by a shadow person. I know that they cause psychological issues and they can get inside of our heads. They can get inside and cause
causing group suicide.
Yeah, but that's causing us to do harm to ourselves. They're not able to actually physically harm us.
So I just have to shout at them and say,
just
you're not
shout.
welcome here. And then I can get some rest tonight. That's good to know.
It'll be
Thank
like
you.
that.
That's a good bedtime story. See, you have daylight there. I'm watching sun stream through yours. And I was thinking, this has to be easier for him to do these podcasts during the day. He doesn't have to go to sleep afterwards.
But okay, so I'm going to ask you, while we were doing this recording today, were you keeping an eye on the background to see if you could see any shadows or anything moving behind me?
No, I've been overly focused with your poster. I want to believe because I keep wanting to mark out the want to.
Okay, so I believe. Well,
but I do see the sunlight streaming through. I wasn't looking for shadows. I think.
Well, there is like a slightly humanoid shadow behind you, but I figured out that it's actually your shadow. So don't worry.
Why would you do that to me? Did you see my face?
I did.
You saw my face. Like, why would you say that?
It's in the fold of your curtains, but what I figured out is that it's you. While we were talking, while you were doing your bit, I was like, God, should I tell her that there's a shadow behind her? Should I not? But then I figured out that it's your shadow that's moving. Because every time you moved, it moved.
Of course, tell me. Why would you? You don't lead out with, oh, if you saw a shadow, what would you do? You start with, hey, there's a shadow. Don't ask me my response. God, that's definitely my shadow. Don't freak me out.
So, of course, we would like to hear from the listeners, right? If anybody's got a story of encountering...
No, I'm still panicking, Xander.
There's no shadow behind you. It is your shadow.
All right, then.
And it's obviously, now we have confirmation of your soul. You definitely have a soul. You have a shadow.
I do.
So there's no doubt about that. But of course, we want to hear from the listeners. We want to know if they've had any encounters with the shadow people or the Hat Man. And now that we've got our fancy new website set up, you can actually leave us a voice note on the website. So if you go to https://xspodcast.com, or just follow the link in the show notes, and you see on the page in the bottom corner, there will be a little blue icon of a microphone. If you click that little blue icon, it will allow you to send us a voice note. So go ahead and send us your encounters and your stories of seeing shadow people or Hat Man or any of those weird
or aliens or Bigfoot.
Pretty much anything at all.
Sirens.
Spooky, weird, funny, sad, silly. We don't mind. We want to hear from the listeners.
We do.
Yeah, so exciting times.
It is.
Yeah.
Exciting. My heart's pumping really fast. Thank you for that.
For all the wrong reasons. Maybe we can take your mind off it. Why don't you give a shout out to some listeners for us?
Okay. Thank you. My shout outs are going to
the shadow man behind me.
The shadow man behind me. See why? It's good that it's so close to Halloween. You know, I'm going to be texting you all night. Still can't sleep. Thank you for putting that in my head. It is psychosis, but you probably started it. Mm-hmm. My shout outs are going to a science teacher I work with named Brianna Kern in Phoenix, Arizona, Nancy Webb in Los Angeles, who really honestly makes me think that being a vegetarian or vegan may be the way to go. And believe it or not, and Theodore Malapanis in Canada.
Why is vegetarian or vegan the way to go? What's that about?
This woman, she looks 20 years younger than her age. I promise you. It's fascinating. And so that I know it should be for 1,000 other reasons, but honestly, just looking at her skin, I'm like, I should be a vegetarian.
I immediately adore her and hate her at the same time for all for the same reason.
She was a Playboy bunny back in the day, don't you know?
Come on.
Yeah, and she can still get into the same outfit.
She pisses me off. I haven't even met her and she already irritates me. For all the best reasons, because she looks amazing and I don't. And I can't get into my Play Bunny costume anymore. It just doesn't fit.
Well, I still think that you're gorgeous.
Aww,
you're gorgeous anyway. I've never seen you in the Playboy
and you've never
bunny
even
outfit,
seen me with my bunny ears. Yeah, you've never even seen me with my bunny ears on. My shout outs this week are going to Juanita Slabert in the UK, Shana of the Sideshow podcast, who we mentioned last week, Mel, the listener that called in with her story. Her partner's name is Shana, and she's been listening to our podcast as well.
Nice.
So hey, Shana of the Sideshow podcast. To Jenny and Chris of Tianjin in China, to Brendan at Podpage, because Podpage is just so awesome, and this guy has made such an awesome product that he deserves the shout out. And also to the producer at the Jim Harold Spooky Studios, Maddie, who I've been interacting with on email as well recently, and she's been great fun. She did one of those awkward, those terrible faux pas with auto emailing templates, and she forgot to enter my name. So I received an email that says, "Hey, enter name here. And then the content of the email. So now every time we email back and forth, that's what my name is from now on. Hey, name here. Yeah.
Nice.
So just one more time, we definitely want to hear our listeners' spooky stories. So follow the link to our podcast website and leave us a voice note, or you can send us an email. And don't forget to subscribe and follow and share our podcast. Our new email address is info@excesspodcast.com. And on Instagram, we are Xanderstone Podcast. And on Twitter, we are Xanderstone10. Thank you for creeping around in the shadows with us today. So from me, Xander.
And me, Stone.
Remember to live life in excess.